He's a hypochondriac, we know, but was really worried about the effect of COVID. And he really, I think that secretly he sees a very, very unhealthy population to the extent of disgusting things, if I can do it, because it was something I was surprised of by a British chief, but we'll keep quiet about that, that the Ukrainians were worried about the effect on morale of these battalions of the write-offs.
Yes.
That is, the write-offs with hepatitis C and with AIDS, and it's true. And this is what has happened. The casual approach, official approach to disease and decay in Russia, of course, it's not what we see from the streets of St. Petersburg or Rostov or of Moscow, but it's bound to hit.
Welcome to another edition of Times Here to Frontline with me, Philip Bingham. Today we're still at DSEI, the large defence exhibition at Excel in London, but we're very fortunate to be talking to Robert Fox, an old friend of the show. Robert, welcome back to
Hello. Can we hear each other speak with all the surrounding and background noise?
Well, that's one of the beauties of these exhibitions and all the rest, is the buzz around them, not just the kits that we see on display and everything else.
I don't think anybody could afford all this kit. You have all this, and there are so many wonder weapons here. You know, forget about Wonder Woman or Superman. You know, the wonder weapon which is going to do it. The number of contractors that I've come across that know the answer which nobody else does to AI, for example, it's very funny. And it's been quite sobering to hear from two of the chiefs. Actually, it's the people that are going to do it, and that's what you've got to think about it. And it's been very much, this DSEI, amazing, too complex in some ways. What is so interesting about it is such a game of two halves. And if you listen very carefully to what the British service chiefs have been saying, it's something really rather different. And it's a sobering, practical, and even sort of rather grown-up discourse that they've been making.
Well, we'll come on to DSEI and we'll come on to what the British service chiefs are saying in a moment. But, you know, one of the reasons or one of the discussions in the wings around here is what's going on in Ukraine. And there's a major Ukraine theme going through here. And, you know, from a geopolitical perspective, the body language that I'm seeing out of Donald Trump is that he doesn't know what to do now. He's beginning to realize Putin is playing him. The European leaders or the coalition of the willing are pressurizing him in a way that he's suddenly stepping back and going, this is much bigger, much more complex than I thought. Where do you think it's going?
I'd like to talk about Trump first. I think Trump has always tried to say this is a European thing, and the Europeans are no good and not doing what they should. And remember, with this administration, it came fast out of the blocks with both Pete Hegseth and J.D. Vance saying, I wonder if they reflect on it. I don't think either of them, although Vance is by far the more intelligent man. I don't think they're great reflectors. But I wonder if they reflect on what they said when they first came into office. It was incredibly ill-advised as to what was going on. So we get to Trump. What has happened with Trump? He thought he could blame the Europeans and go away, and he had a buddy-buddy relationship with Putin, which did seem to persist through the first Trump administration. That has gone because Putin is increasingly going off into his own planet. And the thing with Trump is, what do I do about it next? I've got so many things on my plate. I've been too radical. I mean, he's followed the precept of one of the greatest strategic thinkers of our time, one Julie Burchill, who said, if it ain't broke, break it. And that's exactly what Trump has done. And I think this is where Ukraine, if he could see it that way, but shock comes very slowly to Donald Trump, at least strategic shock, I think he may reflect it's rather more important than I think it is, because it's both a link and an obstacle to dealing with China. Yeah. And it's all linked up. So I can't walk away from Europe. Europe, after all, are the allies. Yes, they're beginning to step up. And you can't take the approach that particularly Vance did at the beginning. We could just walk away, forget about Europe. China's the thing. It's not as simple as that. And he begins to realize, as he did in the first administration, perhaps these guys, not being a reader himself, but what they're supposed to do, these advisors of mine, have been reading the wrong books, the wrong history books. So that's where we are. So on Ukrainian strategy for Europe, for Western Europe, and this is very serious, and somebody like Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, becomes so important as a fixed point in this. Trump is secondary.
Yep.
Trump is unreliable because, look, just recently as we speak, in the last few days, that they've slowed the delivery of air defense weapons from the United States, again, which have been paid for, after all, by Europe. And so it's very, very difficult to read, but it's very difficult to read what is going on the Russian side of the battlefield. People who really know, like the new First Sea Lord, Royal Marine, Gwyn Jenkins, there was reference to it, Jim Hockenhull, above all, and now with the redesignated Cyber and Special Operations Command, the fact at last we've got a 4-star proper Special Operations Command, which he is working like mad to build up, at least as something. And he was saying that, and he's a real defense intelligence expert, where the Russians are being forced at the moment is extremely interesting. So as I blather away to you, I think what happens in the next 3 weeks is absolutely vital. And there are other things that are coming out which shows that Russia is in trouble in a very unexpected way.
Right, so an unexpected way, but let's go back one step to Donald Trump. Do you
want to know what that unexpected way is?
I do in a second, but I want to just explore one thing about Donald Trump. Do you think that the optics of Putin, Xi Jinping, and Kim Jong-un standing together in China is something that has rocked Donald Trump back? And what do you think? What do you think is going to happen in Ukraine? Because I work in gut feeling a lot of the time. My gut feeling is, looking at things that are going on, something is brewing.
First of all, Trump grew up on game shows, on reality TV. And this was a bit of reality TV, which is all it was. Because if you analyze, as we classicists, not that I'm a classicist, would say, parse that one,
classicist analyzing reality TV.
That's right. Parse the construction of those very, very posed occasions in Beijing. For all the glad handing of Trump, it was like a slap around your face in a Punch and Judy show, because you could see the inscrutable Xi looking actually quite scrutable. I've got to work this one out. I've made claims for China. I know what China wants to do. We've got bags of trouble at home, like a bag of nails. And the idea that I'm going to be an ally of India, or India can be relied to be an ally of mine, and in the middle of it, you've got Kim Jong-un, this strange regime, which has got bags of weapons, only half of which will work, but that's more than enough. And a society and a community that is really dying and really, really, really under stress. So what does that really mean? It stung Trump's vanity.
Yeah.
That's the bit that counts. And the other bit that counts with Trump, we haven't talked about, we should just pluck out of the air, of course, Venezuela. And he's got a lot. What seems to be happening at this time, because look at the way he's walked away from Gaza and Netanyahu, although continuing to send the weapons. But it's sorry to quote the Emperor with Mozart, too many notes, Mozart, too many notes in your playing. He's got too much on his plate.
Yeah.
And you can see, and he hasn't got the team.
Yeah.
The thing is that, whenever we laughed at him a bit, but he had Mike Pompeo, he had some good national security advisors and really intelligent people, H.R. McMaster, even John Bolton, who knew how to analyze an international scenario. He hasn't got that. He's only got Rubio, and Rubio is playing to his own agenda. Now, this is a very fractured approach. Europe has to take that into consideration. Very much wants to keep Trump on board, very much wants to keep, the template of NATO going. But it's a game of parts now. The real workers have got to work at it. And that puts Britain in a very, very strange place indeed. All sides seem to want some kind of British leadership, but with what behind them? And that's the thing that I think the Starmer government is still trying to work out. But meanwhile, there are very strange things going on the Russian side, as you say.
So come on, what do you think the strange things are that are happening on the Russian side at the moment?
Well, I'm sort of shooting myself in the foot because I wanted to write about it later on. There have been some extraordinary reports in Reuters now, a very coherent, well worked out report. People around Putin, they claim it's Putin, but they haven't been able to get it, are really worried about what do you do with an army of 700 to 750,000 when it comes home.
Yeah.
And this bulk, I think, is a problem. One knew it was always going to be a problem because that's conservative. It's about 750 plus the rotation, 1 million casualties, plus in depth 1.5 million, including the reservists, go to 2.5 if you're looking at the GRU, if you're looking at the Interior Ministry forces, who might be very restive now, plus an economy which is creaking. It was a lot of sort of sucking of teeth in Whitehall when they were the Ukrainians were attacking the pipelines, the refineries, and so on. Oh, I think they're going to need to take out one very senior military officer. They're going to have to take out 5 refineries. How on earth he worked? No, 5 refineries more. They've done the damage.
Yeah.
They've done the damage because of the petrol rationing, the shortage, and even worse, the selective, dire shortage of water in Donetsk and in Crimea. And from what we hear, the Crimean situation is appalling for the people there. Meanwhile, under the instruction from the leader that they're trying to mount the fag end of a summer into autumn offensive to take at least North Donetsk, to get Pokrovsk, to get Dobropilo, still fighting around Chasiv Yar, would you believe it? And to do this, can you believe it, that they've had to abandon trying to push the Ukrainians out of that remaining lip that they had at Kharkiv and Sumy? And so something is going off. Not that all is sweetness and light for the Ukrainians, because the terrible thing is that they are taking a battering from the air, and they are finding it difficult to raise reinforcements, to get the levies. You know, they're almost press gangs. There are reports of it, but they're holding the line. The fact is it hasn't buckled yet. And the other thing, which is strategic, it's the harvest.
Yep.
The harvest, and not only harvest of corn, particularly maize, but things like potatoes. Reports that Russia has had to buy potatoes from outside, I suppose from the Caucasus it would be. Reports that Russia has been shipping in petrol by the hundreds of thousands of litres, if not millions of litres, from Belarus. Would you believe it? Reports very well based that in Sakhalin, Vladivostok, petrol is now rationed, and that is spreading. This raises a very big question, and it's quite clear, and it has been much of the discussion here today, was could the Allies not have closed off the contest in eastern Ukraine much earlier by giving them all the weapons they needed, not holding back on things like, air-launched weapons like Storm Shadow Scud and the equivalent of HIMARS. Now they've got HIMARS and ATACMS and Taurus. Yes, maybe they could have done it, but that was Bidenism. Biden was the most cautious about, and it goes back to Obama. We don't want to upset Russia too much. We don't want it to fall apart. Well, now it's a case of survival. It's a case of survival which has been put most notably by the Baltics, saying, look, if you don't deal with this, that this virus will go on. And Finland and Poland, they've got to do it. But I think that the next 5 years for the Russian Federation is going to be, I'm not predicting the removal of Putin because I just don't know. I just don't know what goes on in that cabal. But I think that a fracturing Russia is going to be a huge nuisance because they will use covert operations. They believe in revenge. They will come out and smack the cyber operations. They will hit the pipelines because they've been doing it already, which is what, for instance, the general public in Britain will not accept.
But do you think, and it's interesting that you talk of the increasing tension across the Russian Federation. One of the worst case scenarios I put out in commentary I've suggested is that if Putin loses and Russia's forced back, and he's pushed out of office, then the control of the federation that is relied on from Moscow, Moscow would lose a lot of that control, and it could see the breakup of the federation in a way that would make the breakup of Yugoslavia seem like a Sunday school picnic.
Yeah.
And that's something that potentially world leaders are more concerned about. Now, maybe I'm putting too much into the forward thinking of the likes of Donald Trump and European leaders, but could that be a concern that is causing global leaders to ease off on the support for Ukraine because they don't want to stimulate that? Or do you think I'm sort of giving them too much credit for forward thinking?
I think the latter. I'm not too worried about global leaders. There are very few who are not creatures of the moment, looking for survival. Even, look at Macron, look at Merz even. The only one who isn't in Europe seems to be Meloni, where she's got a ghastly fiscal situation, but a very happy nation, which is bizarre. But
and the Italians always have.
Well, yeah, but also there's a lot of clear thinking. They've got a better run and better coordinated navy than Britain has at the moment. Let that be said, which is quite a powerful statement to have to make, because we're a navy of bits, good bits, some of it, but they're not. You look at their military programs.
Well, it's not just the navy; it's their air force as well, and they seem to be for a budget a fraction the size of the British Army budget.
They seem to know how to make it work. So we'll park that one. The apprehension about Russia, I think it's there, and I think it's quite limited. Historically, it's quite limited, because the thing is, along with climate change, the other migration and movement, and is utterly related. It's the demographic altering of the whole planet, which, when you see almost all United Nations, all its agencies, predict that, come 80 years' time, only 6 nations on Earth will have a sustainable population. They'll be huge, they'll grow, but then they start declining, and they start declining big time. Now, this is very much affecting Britain now. I work with Italian demographers, follow the stats in the Netherlands, partly because of my domestic circumstances, but it's the most developed economy just about in Europe, therefore, of a sophisticated economy in the world. And look at the pressures going on there. The sort of things where the alarm bells have really rung, that Greece and South Korea are facing something we never really thought I never thought I'd see in such a demographic collapse within a generation. Which is, Greece could go from just over 10 million to just over 3 in 75 years, and that's disastrous. The pressure. Relate that, and in Scotland it's feeling, and Wales is feeling it here. But also, the question of employment, which has been stalking these halls as we come to this thing. It's very, very difficult, because when you get demographic decline, I won't go into it, it's a separate program. It's very interesting because the effect is not necessarily direct, it's not obvious. Suddenly you find lots of young people very reluctant to think about work at all, is one of the things. Back to Russia. The demographic crisis, yes, it's in slow decline, the population. More dramatic, Ukraine is in decline. But it's the quality. It's the quality of the population. You look at the steady fall of life expectation of adults, and it's going down and down and down, and it's health. This is why the sensible side of Putin, he's a hypochondriac, we know, but was really worried about the effect of COVID. And he really, I think that secretly he sees a very, very unhealthy population, to the extent of disgusting things, if I can do it, because it was something I was surprised of by a British chief, but we'll keep quiet about that the Ukrainians were worried about the effect on morale of these battalions of the write-offs.
Yes.
That is, the write-offs with hepatitis C and with AIDS, and it's true. And this is what has happened. The casual approach, official approach to disease and decay in Russia, of course, it's not what we see from the streets of St. Petersburg or Rostov or of Moscow, but it's bound to hit. Since we're on this, I think it's very, very important to see why the Putin regime was so threatened by Alexei Navalny. What was he doing? He was campaigning way out in the east.
Yeah.
And what he spotted was how unpopular the apparatchiks sent in to be governors, to be elected as governors in these utterly fixed elections, were from Moscow, that they didn't like them. And the fear is, to coin a phrase, it's been around since the 100 Years' War, they fear, as indeed you get it in parts of France, this thing known as a jacquerie. Jacquerie is a spontaneous explosion against the authorities with no particular leadership, because it was Jacques in the 100 Years' War, and with no particular program. But it is, I'm fed up, stuff this, stuff you. And Putin and Xi spotted this in the Coloured Revolution. These spontaneous explosions across China are not unknown, where you suddenly wake up in the morning, you find half the municipal governors hanging from outside the mayoralty and things like that. I exaggerate, but that has been recorded in 2 or 3 cases, and it's what's happening. And so I've been very long-winded, coming around to a point. Yes, the fragmentation of Russia and why it will happen from an unexpected trigger point and will have very unexpected results, because, of course, it will feed sheer criminality globally.
Well, yeah, another trigger point within that, and you're talking health, and it's interesting, is I don't think Putin or Zelensky have got in place an understanding of what the mental health crisis is going to be across the population, in particular in Ukraine, because it's hitting the civilian population as much as it's hitting the military population. But you talked of 750,000 at least Russians going back in, and that mental health crisis that would seep through society is something that could stimulate just what you've done. Do you think that is something that they're aware of, they're planning for, or they realize the
I think they're aware of it for this reason, because they've had the experience with the veterans returning from Afghanistan, from 10 years' war in Afghanistan. It was nothing like the same number, but a former British ambassador, Roderick Braithwaite, wrote a wonderful book on the Afghansis, and he got into them. And it's not everybody, but it's about 10% of the veterans who become near psychopaths. We had a horrible case of a guy that had murdered his wife, was sent to the front, is demobbed after 6 months, and he comes back and he murders his girlfriend. And it's serving 19 years, must be said, in Russia. Yes, they cannot be unaware of this, but it's the question of governance and civility in Ukraine. And to which serious charities, some of them are Brit, are worrying about civic governance and what happens there. And I think Zelensky is more aware than you might think, because that's why Zelensky held back from recruiting the best from the universities, the best young men and women, because he said, we've got to have this generation. He's being accused of absolutely everything under the sun. You know, the endemic corruption there, they haven't got rid of the oligarchs, and I don't think they ever will in that particular part of the world. But he's more aware, he must be absolutely exhausted as well. And a British guy who spent a lot of time working in Ukraine, very close to, since 22, said to me, helping support and manage the peace, whatever it is, in Ukraine, is probably going to be more difficult than our supporting the war there.
Well, on helping to manage the peace in Ukraine, let's hope that that peace comes quickly. But Robert, it's been a real pleasure talking to you again on Times Radio Frontline.
Thank you. Thank you.
You've been watching Frontline with me, Philip Ingram. If you'd like access to exclusive content, please subscribe to Times Radio membership and watch us on YouTube. But you can now get us as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. And don't forget, you can also listen to Times Radio for the latest updates on global affairs and read about them at thetimes.com. Thank you.